Good evening, everybody, and welcome back for another episode of Awoken with Aulden. I am your host, Aulden S. Nance, and we have a great show for you tonight, bringing on a great friend of the show, Kerri Marbut, and she's going to show us her expertise and depth of the agriculture industry in the United States and around the world. Today is Awoken Wednesday, January 21st, 2026. I can't believe we are already a little over 3 weeks into this calendar year already. It's flying by. It's going to be February before we know it. So, it's Awoken Wednesday. Hope you were able to catch a little bit of the live stream this morning. I was out on a run, and we got a little action, if you were able to catch it, of a couple members of the United States Congress share some brief remarks outside of the Supreme Court of the United States, the SCOTUS building, about the court case there were hearings on it today by SCOTUS over Lisa Cook, who sits on the Fed board currently, and the president is hoping to kick her out of town and remove her from the board. And the justices were hearing arguments about that case today. The Democratic Congress members made points of attempting to keep the Fed an individual body. We see this after the Trump administration released I believe, criminal complaint or charges or something of that matter against Fed Chair Jerome Powell a little over a week ago at this point over discrepancies or hoping to potentially remove him over this renovation going on at the Fed headquarters in Washington, D.C. So we're going to spend a couple minutes on that tonight. Also going to spend a couple minutes at the World Economic Forum. The president made some comments, additional comments about the world's largest island of Greenland. Today marks a pretty major shift in that, as it is the first time he has stated that military action is now off the table. We saw this, a big head turner a couple weeks ago, I should say, when Stephen Miller and Jake Tapper were getting after it at an interview on CNN, how Miller did not take military intervention off the table. So that marked a big escalation. We have a couple comments from the audience already this evening getting after it. At Roy3121, let's go, #Awoken Wednesday, wonderful. And at Nicholas Alexander 940, in all caps, quote, "We have a framework," end quote, Donald John Trump. That was another big thing from the president today about Greenland, is that he announced this framework. Don't know the deets on it yet. However, he stressed several times. I listened to a majority of the speech today, and at Roy3121 again, Greenland becoming red, white, and blue land is inevitable. That is amazing. Thank you for that comment, Roy. I believe you just started a social media campaign, a new hashtag on that blue land, red, white, and blue land is inevitable. And it kind of seems to be heading that way. If you were here a little over a month and a half ago now, when I discussed the national security strategy with Alex, the Trump corollary was the president mentioned this and that, maybe not Greenland in particular seizing it. However, Canada becoming the 51st state, seeking halfway regime change, or at least kidnapping Maduro in Venezuela, putting pressure on the president of Colombia, helping out the president of Argentina when his election a couple months ago. And now Greenland is one of the more recent developments with this. And we're going to, I'll talk a few minutes about that. If you didn't catch the Greenland episode a couple weeks ago, you should do that. Before wanting to get into those things, did have a little personal gloat to share is congratulations to the Indiana Hoosiers on an undefeated 16-0 Big Ten champions and national championship season. They defeated the Miami Hurricanes at Hard Rock Stadium on Monday night, 21-27, to complete this campaign, this undefeated campaign. Coach Cignetti, only his second season, only lost 2 games last year, went unscathed this year, and really an amazing all-around season. We're talking about a program that had no hope 2 years ago. It was, attendance was poor. There was no hype. The stadium still is, it's one of the smaller stadiums in the Big Ten. So this national championship victory really has to showcase the skills of Coach Cignetti. And I'm sure you've probably seen the photo of IU's quarterback, Mendoza, diving for that touchdown on 4th and 5 with about, I think, 6 or 7 minutes left in the fourth quarter. And it really seemed to be a gut punch for the the Miami Hurricanes with that. So congratulations to the Heisman, soon to be Las Vegas Raider at this rate, Victor, quarterback Mendoza, and to Coach Cignetti. Really impressive deal there with the Hoosiers. So congratulations once again. Glad they pulled away with the victory. I'm sure lots of Hoosiers felt a lot of pride in that. So wanting to get a little bit about the Lisa Cook situation is that I believe around last summer or so, or even last fall, the president intended to dismiss her from the board, which is seen as unprecedented because the Fed is, we hear about it, it's supposed to be its own solo, non-political institution, and it really seemed to be an escalation with that. So you have the president trying to dismiss her over, I believe, fraud case, or not reporting something on her taxes before she was confirmed under the Biden regime in 2022, I believe. And so you have that occur, and you also, and now you get to today, and something else, I guess, for context with that is that she has never been formally charged with any misconduct when it comes to that situation. So an escalation there. We're looking at this morning, if you caught a little bit of the live stream, about Congresswoman Maxine Waters and Congressman Al Green of California and Texas, respectively. They really highlighted their opposition to the move and support and their well wishes to the justices that they would allow her to keep her position, or at least have more evidence in court or some more court procedure play out to go along with that. And they were pretty aggressive with it. I think Al Green, it was a little hard to hear him because they didn't have a very good microphone, honestly, this morning. But he made some comments about how the Republicans are not loyal to the Constitution anymore, called it was like the GOP cronies or something like that. So they're going to go after this hard. And we see with Jerome Powell, you saw that video, I believe it was a minute and a half, 2 minutes, something like that, that he released a couple weeks ago about how he had been charged and I believe subpoenaed even, something of that matter. And discussions about how the Fed should remain an independent institution and why that he was concerned about these charges being brought against him. So this is something that has been brewing for a little bit now. And the thing is with Powell, I think the term is over in May. I think his last day as chair is in May. So they only have to ride him this tenure a couple more months. Now, I know midterms are coming up and they're starting to get a little itchy at trying to get the interest rates down more. We hear about it all the time. The affordability issue is starting as we head into this midterm year. That's probably what the Dems are going to stick, kind of put their stake in and attach it to, is just everything is still really expensive, whether it's homes or food. And we'll learn a little bit more about that tonight. The agriculture side of things, is it really any president's fault or not? But besides that, that's what the Dems are going to kind of start leaning on a little bit. Maybe the institutional erosion potentially too, but it's not like they have a high horse to step on either. So we'll keep doing some updates on that in the upcoming weeks. Wanted to say that real quickly. And wanting to move on to geopolitics a little bit is Greenland. The president at the World Economic Forum today made the claim, or stated for the first time, that there would be no military invasion into Greenland by the United States in order to seize it. As Nicholas in the comments shared a moment ago, the president announced a framework to go along with that. So, but besides the point, let's think about from an America First mindset for a moment, is Greenland. If I laid this out a lot more I did more of a deep dive into on the Greenland episode, but you have the Chinese Polar Silk Road Initiative, the white paper they released in 2018. They are eyeing the island. Russia as well. And one of the arguments is that if Russia ever launched these missiles, they wouldn't necessarily have it go west across. They'd have it go north over the northern sector of Earth, and it would cross either into or beside Greenland. So the justification for that is to totally possess this island, and you have that in total control for maximum protection. Even though we have a base there right now, it's at least the admin is saying it's not enough as it stands currently. So yeah, what's it really matter? The Trump corollary really emphasizes that we need to have total control over our hemisphere, and then it would make some of the other regions on Earth maybe not as important anymore. If we can have this on lock, then we might not need to be in the Middle East every day, or we might not need to be trying to maybe do so much in Europe or Asia or somewhere like that. So there is, I believe, an advantage to having the island, and it doesn't mean it has to become a state. It can be like a Guam or a Puerto Rico, a territory. That's what it is right now in Denmark. Yeah, they have their own political institutions, but they're still a welfare baby. They totally depend. Half of the money to fund the island comes from Denmark still. They only have fisheries and some rare earth minerals, and it's not enough. They still need about $700 million to make up for that. So a pretty big development in Greenland today by the president, and it signals that whether it's through purchasing or other means, is that the island we will attempt to more aggressively control it, and we'll have to keep seeing what the president, uh, Marco Rubio, and all the usual suspects say about Greenland. You got another comment from at Nicholas Alexander 940. The Federal Reserve is completely unconstitutional and gross overreach of government power. They exert incredible influence on the domestic and international economy. Hashtag audit the Fed. Wonderful, and they do. We see when it comes to the Fed, setting the interest rates by itself is huge on home affordability and ownership, as we've seen with people in my age bracket in particular. So wonderful comment, Nicholas. Okay, so before we get into our main topic tonight, would like to remind you if it's your first time on the live stream, if it's your first time hearing this, and not even just on the live stream, we're on Spotify, we're on Twitch, we're on X Live. I upload the videos to Spotify and Rumble every day after. We're on Instagram. So if you're hearing this on any of those platforms, please follow the platform you're listening to and go to some of the other platforms and check them out as well. So please go ahead, subscribe to the channel, leave this video a like, leave a comment. We already got a couple comments from Nicholas and Roy tonight. Go ahead and join them down in the comment section. Join the party. A lot of fun stuff going on there as well. Let us know what you think about our analysis and what you think we missed, or if you have a counter to what we're about to say. Okay. So without further ado, we will bring on this evening's guest, a great friend of the show, Kerri Marbut. And here, let's get her on here. Welcome, Kerri.
Hi, Aulden. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. And we're glad to have you on and speak to the Awoken. So you're in the Awoken audience right now. Share with the Awoken a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like Aulden said, my name is Kerri Marbut. Met Aulden when I came up here to DC, but grew up in Texas, kind of in the ag industry. Went to Texas A&M University, where I got degrees in animal science specific to beef production, and then also another degree in agricultural economics, where my focus was really in international trade, policy, and economic analysis. So kind of a broad education here. But today, in my professional capacity, I work within food supply chain issues, agricultural policy. So I kind of get a view from production, in my upbringing, all the way down to when the food hits the grocery store and it gets to your plate. So I'm very, very honored to be here and that you trust me to kind of speak on this topic. So I hope I do it justice.
Absolutely, and I'm sure you will. And everyone give Kerri a warm welcome in the comments as well. So let's get this guy pulled up, and we will begin this evening's presentation. Wonderful. All right, awesome. Okay, so I was just kind of a little backstory on why I thought about it. Is agriculture very important? I'm sure we all had something to eat today, so that's pretty important for human survival. And I was thinking, what's a great way to really explain to the Awoken why I started the show is to wake people up to all of these things that happen in our world and our country that we may not think about or know the details on as much. And agriculture is one of those things for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's get started.
Totally. And yeah, global trade is shifting. We're looking at whether it's tariffs or the BRICS alliance, the global South teaming up, or other alliances and trade compacts beginning, is that you have a lot of these, the climate change, whether Now you can agree or disagree with maybe how it's coming, but that is a reality. And there's war and other instability that are causing. We see during COVID, for example, the supply chain really got messed up all over all industries. So, and agriculture is often, whether it's has to do with the livestock or not, is one of the first sectors that's impacted by this global trade.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe this is a little bit of bias, but I think, when you look at things that are happening in the world, a lot of people's minds don't go to agriculture. Mine goes directly there. Again, this is what I'm passionate about. This is what I grew up doing. It's important to me. And I mean, if you're wearing clothes today, or you ate today, you drank something today, I mean, thank a farmer. None of that would be possible without this industry. And like you said, a lot of these things that are happening in the world tend to affect this industry first, and it's not often, it doesn't have a spotlight on it until things get really bad. And to kind of speak on the changes in global trade, we've kind of within the last several decades really upped this efficiency in global trade, right? This system has been designed for efficiency, not necessarily durability. And so I call this kind of a just-in-time setup, right? Where it's like, how quick can we get a steak from Texas, from a cow in Texas on your plate in New York City? How do we make these efficient processes go forward? How do we make more money? How do we make ourselves faster and better? And I'm not really sure that was necessarily the correct approach that you should take. I mean, this should be a just-in-case approach, right? How do we mitigate risks? How do we prepare for the future? How do we even now, with the geopolitical atmosphere right now, prepare for conflict or tensions with others? How do we protect this in our food supply chain? If a country can't feed itself, it can't sustain itself. And that's just a sheer fact of the matter, right? You can have all the armies you want, all the military strength you want, but if you can't feed anybody, you don't have anybody. And so kind of, there's been this tension building up in trade. And I think a lot of people think that President Trump came in for the second term, right, and had these almost radical trade policies. It was this hard shift from what was happening in the Biden era. And I don't disagree with that, but I think that there's a lot of forgetfulness that's happening where you forget these certain things that have taken place throughout those 4 or 5 years before Trump's second term started, that really opened our eyes to the inefficiencies of trade and the supply chain. You look at COVID-19, right? In the US especially, you got to see all these headlines on the news, beef shortages, meat shortages, there's nothing on the shelves anymore. And that's not necessarily because the product wasn't being produced. It's being produced, but you have this global pandemic that's happening that's preventing logistics from carrying on. And, if you don't have people cutting, the meat in the processing facilities, it's not going to make it to the shelves in Kroger or Walmart. I think another thing that really highlighted some of these vulnerabilities within the supply chain and trade in general was this war that Russia waged against or is waging against Ukraine. When you look at inputs for the agricultural sector, specifically in crops, fertilizer, right? Fertilizer has critical minerals within the fertilizer itself that helps these crops grow, right? A lot of those are produced in Ukraine and in Russia in some parts. And so you see that this is brittle. It's very vulnerable in this, right? And so I think another thing to mention about global trade, and people are saying, oh, the U.S. has had these radical trade policies. They're shifting, they're protectionist, and I kind of disagree with that. And I think in a way, it's reining in some of these unfair trade relationships that we've had, these so-called free trade agreements that we've had with certain countries. That reciprocal relationship hasn't been, those obligations haven't been met. It's not been a fair relationship, and so I think this is good to reel back some of that and really take a look at what's going on and where can we optimize our trade. But it's not just the US doing that. It's happening globally. Everybody's trying to protect their core sectors and their crucial sectors, and that's agriculture. How do we protect our domestic food supply? How do we feed our people? How do we make sure that we're able to, you know, sustain a population? So
Very good points. And yeah, learn about this growing up is in military campaigns, if the troops can't be fed properly or if the weather gets too bad, it doesn't matter how strong you are, is that if you can't meet the necessities, you're going to go down. So
yeah.
great points, Kerri. And yeah, kind of continuing from that point is it's not only a United States only problem, is that other countries will actively, and continents as a whole, will protect their food systems. And they have to do that based off of climate in their area or conflict and trade agreements they're in. Maybe they have to produce X amount of soybeans or rice to meet their obligations or something like that. And with government support,
Yeah.
in like our country, there's crop insurance and stuff like that. So absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, every major power protects its farmers, right? Other countries use subsidies and export controls to make sure that their domestic industry is protected. We're very lucky in the United States where hypothetically we could only use what we produce in the United States and sustain life and be just fine. But it's that benefit of choice, right? That we as consumers benefit from within the grocery store, bananas, coffee, and I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But supporting farmers and having that support from the government isn't an American anomaly. It's kind of this global baseline, and I think you don't hear a lot about it because it's an often understated and misunderstood industry, and it's very nuanced in a lot of ways. But I mean, you have things like the EU's common agricultural policy, or even China as a state directing credit, and then also Brazil having a very, very, very robust rural loan program. And they shield a lot of their producers and protect them from a lot of market volatility or things that can happen in the market that maybe have these outcomes that aren't so favorable for their producers. And I don't think this question is not whether the government, plays a role, but whether that role reflects the realities of the American land, the climate, the production systems we have here. There's got to be some approach that ensures farmers aren't forced to compete alone or compete against competing foreign governments that are even standing behind even more global competition here in the United States.
Certainly, and that can create a lot of stress for our farmers. And if you caught so last Tuesday, maybe you were here for the Exit 66 episode about how I walked through the 66 organizations that were either within the United Nations or heavily influenced / tied to the UN. And we're looking at these major organizations that sometimes were global that weren't putting America first or even in America's best interest, joining them at all. And as we kind of mentioned on the last slide, is that countries have to look out for their climates and understand what's going on in their sphere of influence. And sometimes these one-size approaches make it tough for a major power like the United States to really fit in.
Absolutely. I think global institutions do have a role in some of this, and they make for useful forums for discussion, but they are poor substitutes for local knowledge. I think a lot of these, especially UN frameworks, ignore the scale of the US agricultural industry. And like you said, that one size fits all approach, that doesn't fit for US producers. Agriculture is actually an inherently local industry, right? It's very important to the local economies of rural areas, specifically within the United States. And I believe that while there is a place and a forum for collaboration, coordination, and discussions to happen, international engagement must not become a domestic mandate for our producers, because what's decided that works for a farm in Germany doesn't work for a farm in Texas. What may work for a producer in Vietnam is definitely not going to work for a rancher in Montana. So I think another important consideration here is differentiating American agriculture from global agriculture. The way that the United States produces agricultural commodities is vastly different than many other regions around the world. And the US, especially innovation as a whole, I think that is a huge strength that we as Americans have. But I think this also is something to be said about agricultural science. Um, we have found ways to edit the genes of crops when you look at wheat or soybeans, and how do we increase this crop yield without increasing inputs that go into producing this. So I think this productivity is built on decades of science-driven innovation and in looking at genetic modification and modern gene editing technologies that have allowed U.S. farmers to really increase these yields, improve drought tolerance, reduce pesticide use, and then also enhance this nutrient efficiency without expanding acreage. We have less farm acres today than we did 200 years ago. So it's really, really helped the United States as a whole kind of setting itself apart to become more productive. And I think this is really resemblant of the American dream, right? And I know it's a little bit of a different context, but being able to do more with less and be more efficient at it and make high quality product in the meantime. So I think that, international forums, they're great. These UN frameworks that we've left are maybe not serving our interests as deeply as they were intended to. And I don't think I have any qualms with that. But I do want to touch a little bit more kind of going outside of the UN. You've got international standards bodies such as Codex Alimentarius, which kind of harmonize food regulatory and food safety rules that are based in sound science. So a lot of the food safety rules and inspection procedures that we have here in the United States are adopted by Codex. And that's kind of pushed around the world globally so that these practices are harmonized and it makes trade a little more seamless. But you've got some frameworks in the EU and in China where they don't recognize those standards from Codex, and it really prevents U.S. products from entering their markets. And I'm speaking here specifically to animal protein, such as beef, and the use of maybe hormones or growth additives within feed to help these animals, grow faster and not use as much grass or corn feed in their feed or their water. And that doesn't mean that hormone is in your body as you eat it. There's a withdrawal period there where there's no trace of any of that left over. But you have certain folks and people around the world that don't recognize that science that's been proved. And so I think that's where you get a little bit, international forums get a little bit tough. And also looking at the UN, especially with climate frameworks. Again, the climate here in the United States varies by region, and that you can't have something that's overarching, for the entire world. It doesn't work like that. And I think it's unrealistic for us to think that it could work or we could achieve that.
Those are some things that I didn't even know before this, is that, you touch on the point that whether it's the hormone amount or stuff like that prevents our products from being able to enter other markets. So that's a great point that I think a lot of people will be surprised to learn about. And yet you just mentioned that as well with trade, about how sometimes some of these trade deals might not be the best for American farmers, but some of them may be misunderstood. In particular, we've seen a lot with the Trump admin has been really pushing, whether it's tariffs or new trade deals with several countries around the world. Japan comes to mind quickly. Everybody's trying to get a little bit of attention from India as well with their large population. Um, so yeah, maybe if you'd like to touch up on some of these big agreements that you feel like might be misunderstood by the American public.
Yeah, and I think there was a little bit of a frenzy a few months ago from some ag groups, associations, and organizations where there's a fear that maybe very large encompassing free trade agreements are not going to exist anymore. And I don't know whether that's going to happen or not, but what you're seeing from the Trump administration are very small, specialized, targeted trade agreements, trade deals, if you will. And none of these are finalized yet, but these deals with certain countries that are maybe a country specific. It's not a free trade deal with or free trade agreement with 3 countries. It's very specific or a very regional based agreement. And that's based on demand for certain US products within that market, right? Maybe there were tariffs or certain trade barriers, whether that be economic or non-tariff barriers as well. But these trade deals are really aiming to make small little improvements and agreements with other countries and other regions to make sure that American producers have market access in those areas. And that's different than what we've seen in the past. I think a lot of us have seen a lot of large, very holistic free trade agreements. I mean, look at NAFTA, USMCA, other agreements. But these are kind of getting in really deep and in the nitty gritty, and they're focusing on this reciprocity and breaking down these barriers that maybe existed beforehand for U.S. products. But trade agreements, they really do determine whether farmers can get new customers, their product can go everywhere. I mean, one day maybe you're a farmer and you don't have anywhere to sell your soybeans, and then the next day you do. That it's a huge difference. If you don't have anywhere to sell your stuff, then you don't have a business. So I think looking at free trade, this should be an unconditional thing, right? Why are we making trade deals with countries if they're not free trade, if it's not reciprocal? It's got to be reciprocal, and it's got to be mutually beneficial, right? It's not a one-way street. It's two-way. So, I mean, kind of digging into NAFTA back in the 90s, that was hugely important for the agriculture industry. And I'll speak only to the ag. I don't want to talk about anything else, any other sectors. But between the US, Canada, and Mexico in North America, it was just completely, it changed the game. I mean, you had these countries, the 3 of us right here in this one region, and you had all of these non-tariff trade barriers that existed, these regulatory practices, these inspection practices, across the border that just didn't align. You have Canada preventing any dairy or eggs from the US in their market. And Canadian producers and the Mexican producers, they really did benefit from these U.S. market and the openness of that market. But, it didn't allow for U.S. producers to have the same benefit, right?
I think I remember that, that dairy and yogurt comment you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, USMCA in a lot of ways built onto the success that NAFTA already had. And in a lot of ways, even harmonized a lot of these practices even more, specific to ag, that is. And so now you have almost this seamless trade between the 3, and it's for the most part free, and just very, very equal. But I mean, if you're exporting meat from the United States into Mexico, our inspection processes for that meat to make sure it's up to standard and make sure it's safe to eat, Mexico has now adopted the same processes. So essentially, you could have Mexican personnel in the United States personnel in Mexico, or right at that border, at that facility as that shipment's coming in. And it makes it so much quicker and more efficient because we are aligned in that sense. The same can be said for Canada. Um, and I think there's still a lot of issues for US dairy in Canada because Canada does have a decent dairy sector. But whereas we allow Canadian dairy into our markets, Canada doesn't really allow a US dairy into their markets. There's this dairy tariff rate quota. Um, so it restricts a lot of meaningful access and growth for the US dairy industry. Um, I think here you can also talk a little bit about soybeans in China and how they're the largest buyer of US soybeans. And when those tensions start to arise between the United States and China, that's the first thing that China hits on is the soybeans. Because it just puts your farmers out of work in the United States. Nobody's buying their beans. They're out of money. They've put up these investments early on to grow these soybeans, and now there's nowhere for them to go. They're just sitting in a grain, bin. So
that makes it pretty tough as well, and that puts a ton of stressors on them already. And yeah, back to Canada for a second. They need to, I think, start taking some more dairy, or the president should continue the 51st state conference. Yeah, that's not very good from our northern neighbors.
no, and it's sorry, I'm just gonna add a little more here, but I mean it's a little disheartening because I think Canada's really up in arms about this, right? President Trump's threatening tariffs on us. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. Is it ridiculous, or should we just have reciprocal trade between the two of us if we have a free trade agreement? So I think everybody needs to take a step back and look at some things that they want to achieve. And as we come up on the 6-year review of USMCA this July, I believe, it's going to be incredibly important that not only do we maintain what we already have, but we make it better. It's got to be better. And I think it's got potential to be better. It's just, do all parties want to come to the table and actually have honest conversations?
Like, yeah, America first.
Yep.
And to Kerri's point, she mentioned this about the Chinese. They will withhold purchasing the soybeans, and other countries will do similar deals. And we're talking about even more than just not maybe trading fairly or purchasing product. We're talking about foreign influence within our country about production or land ownership. We've been hearing about this a lot since I moved to DC. One of the biggest things that the ag staffer in my Senate office would always hear is Chinese ownership of U.S. farmland. Yeah. Some of it close to vulnerable or maybe fragile infrastructure, whether it's military or national security or something like that. And we're talking about 350,000 of acres of U.S. farmland. That seems to be a lot, and I don't know why this isn't a front news headline every single day on the 5:30 news.
Yeah. I mean, 350,000 acres, that sounds like a lot in theory based on the amount of farm acreage that we have in the United States. I guess it is kind of really small percentage of that, but it doesn't mean that it's not important. Foreign farmland ownership is actually growing, and you're seeing a couple states in the United States now put bans on this at the state level, which is good in my opinion. I don't think that any foreign entity should own land in the United States. That is, whether it's agricultural land, whether it's anything else, I think that is a significant risk for the United States and its national security. But I mean, farmland, it's not just another asset class. I mean, that's the foundation of food production and independence. I've said it again. I mean, a country that cannot feed itself cannot sustain itself. You open yourself up to so many risks if you are unable and incapable to produce your own food in your domestic markets. And now you're looking at China specifically buying farmland, and it's close to military bases, or maybe it's a method in which they're trafficking drugs and able to do that here in the United States. But you look at China wanting to be this unipolar power in the world, right? They want to be the guy, the man. And how are they going to topple the United States? Well, why don't we attack the US food system? You know what I mean? How do we find ways to cripple them? Having that proximity to military bases allows them to maybe gather intelligence on military operations. I don't know specifically, I'm not in that area. But it also allows them to maybe bring biologics into the United States. And I mean, a huge conversation that's kind of up and coming. And for me, as I study national security right now for a master's program and kind of combining that with the agricultural knowledge, is there's this conversation that needs to be had about agro-terrorism. It's not just cyber anymore. It's not just, flying a plane into the Twin Towers or two planes into the Twin Towers. It's how do we actually cripple this country to a point where they can't sustain a population? And a few months ago, and I don't know the specifics of this, so don't quote me here, but I know this did happen where you had two Chinese nationals that were stopped at the northern border of the United States coming in to the United States from Canada. And in their baggage, CBP actually found biologics that were intended to be used, it was blight, to cripple U.S. crops and destroy yields. And if that doesn't scare you, I don't know what does. And if that's just one component of this, think about them maybe going to Chinese-owned land in the United States and how they spread that. This raises a legitimate national security concern for me, and for a lot of people, not just because of the total acreage, but who owns the land and where it's located. And Aulden, I know we were joking earlier, but why would you let the enemy into your bed? This is a huge national security concern here. Why are we allowing people to buy U.S. farmland or land in general? So I don't know. I think this is a huge conversation. I'd like to see it pick up some speed outside of, your members of Congress that are from the heartland. But I'm this worries me, and I hope that it gains some traction.
Yes, and I just did a quick little look into the story you believe you saw, and you did see it correctly. In June of last calendar year, U.S. federal authorities charged multiple Chinese nationals with smuggling dangerous biomaterials into the U.S. To be used for research at laboratories in the University of Michigan, and leading to increased scrutiny of academic collaborations and potential agro-terrorism risks.
Yeah,
it's very frightening that that didn't make front page news as well.
No, and you're hearing a huge conversation. Sorry, Aulden, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. I think, in ag circles, I've heard it a lot. Maybe this is just because I'm there, but you hear this conversation of food security is national security, right? But that goes beyond just ensuring people have food to eat, right? Like there is a legitimate national security component to agriculture and making sure that you can sustain this. And so, I don't know. Maybe I'll be the person to bridge that conversation. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Let's put Kerri on CBS 530 News. Bring this to attention for the country. Awoken the country to this, I should say. Wonderful. And yeah, talking about some of the particular markets we've discussed already tonight, corn, soybeans, deal with China, cattle all over the Midwest. These prices are not really set by the farmers. They grow it and they give it to the next guy and they're done. So, It's not always totally in their favor. They have stuff. Maybe there's agro-terrorism committed, or there's a terrible dry season in the heart of July and all the crops die, or the cattle get too sick and the meat isn't edible or something like that.
Yeah.
So we're talking about a pretty major part of the agriculture economy with these couple products right here.
Yeah, and I think an important thing to understand about farmers is that they're price takers in the global market. Um, they don't really get to set the prices of their product. It's how do they sell it and move it on to the next link in the supply chain. Um, so there could be weather concerns here, conflicts that swing and affect the U.S. farm income significantly. I mean, I referenced Russia Ukraine earlier with fertilizer. You've got this huge increase in fertilizer prices. Of course, prices of corn are going to go up because it's costing more to produce it. So a corn grower in Iowa could do everything right and still lose money because there's a bumper crop in Brazil, or China decides that they're not going to buy something from the U.S. And I've touched a little bit on soybeans, and historically there's been this growth in Chinese imports of U.S. soybeans, tens of millions of metric tons annually, right? Specifically for animal feed, but also for human consumption. And this relationship between the US and China has just caused incredible trade disruptions. There's tariffs, there's political uncertainty, and it's just really crippled these soybean producers, right? You have, this trade war with China and the United States that happened during President Trump's first term. And that was a really hard hit sector of that trade war, is that there was nowhere for these soybeans to go. And from that, I think Brazil saw a strategic advantage here where they are able to produce soybeans, and they had been, but okay, the United States is no longer selling to China. How do we fill that gap? How do we get there? And how do we, increase our production so that we can fill that entire gap that the U.S. left? And quote me and correct me if I'm wrong, but in certain instances, Brazil's been, plowing down part of the rainforest so that they can produce soybeans and increase those acres planted. And it's strategically advantageous for them, right? But it's concerning for the U.S. because if we don't have a good relationship with China, our soybean farmers are just SOL, right? How do we find more diverse markets for these products? Where do we go from here? And we're on the up and up with China, I would say, in terms of the relationship and buying soybeans, where they've made a commitment this year to buy, I forget the exact number, but so many million, metric tons of soybeans. And if I'm not mistaken, they just met that a few days ago. They met that purchasing requirement. Historically, they haven't met their requirements, which is kind of what spurred this trade war, this previous trade war. So that's, there's I'm really encouraged by that, but I don't know if I trust it in the long term. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And we're talking, you mentioned 1 year they'd meet it. What do you do if they don't meet it the next 10 years? What's going to happen with that? And they're probably not just going to miss it by an inch. They're going to miss it by a mile.
Yeah. So, and if there's no enforcement and follow through and the U.S. making sure that happens, then what does that say about the United States to China? And I know I've talked a little bit about soybeans, but I want to kind of move into beef, if that's okay with you.
Again, we all love beef. Ground beef is one of the go-to meals in this household.
Absolutely. I'm a beef loving Texan, so I'll always advocate for that industry. And kind of within the past, 2 months or so, I guess now I'm sorry, 3 or 4 months at this point, we're in the new year now. There was a lot of backlash from the beef industry after President Trump announced that there was potential to import beef from Argentina because beef prices in the grocery store were so high. And I don't know if you've been to the grocery store lately or not, but those prices are still very high, and they have been, and it's a little uncommon. They're abnormally high, right? This isn't because the farmers are trying to make a little more coin, make a little bit larger of a profit. It's something that's beyond their control. A few years ago, we had this major drought throughout, the heartland of the United States of America. So, like, think Texas, kind of up north into Kansas, where there are a lot of beef producers, and Texas having the largest number of cattle and calves, especially historically dry, right? We are kind of always seeing ourselves in a drought in Texas, but this one was crippling, and it starts to affect the yields of crops and the inputs for animal feed. And so when those start to get more expensive because there's a lower supply, you see cattle producers kind of reining in their herd numbers and lowering the number of head they have, so that they're able to still continue to produce. I mean, it makes it hard when you've got these upfront costs that are so extremely high. You've got to cut back your numbers to make sure you still are able to make, a dollar at the end of the day. And I know we'll speak to this a little bit more about the timeline of producing cattle, but it's not a quick fix. I mean, we're just now seeing the effects of this drought a couple of years later, and we're seeing that in the way of increased beef prices at the grocery store. And it's a huge push from the second Trump administration to lower those grocery prices. And I don't blame them for having that conversation about, okay, well, let's import some beef from Argentina. But while that would lower, prices at the grocery store, and you'd see this immediate drop in prices and things would be more affordable for consumers, it's not a good long-term solution. It would give market access to Argentine beef. And Argentina routinely has issues with animal disease. You look at hand, foot, and mouth disease. And it's kind of almost this, slap in the face to these domestic producers that are already kind of having a rough time producing this beef, and they're kind of dealing with the aftermath of this drought, and they're not seeing any of the benefits of the higher prices. And that's because these middlemen in the meat packer industry and the feed yards, those are where those profits are really going, right? A rancher in Texas sells so many head to a feed yard. They're at the feed yard for a little bit, and then those get sold. They go to slaughter, and then the meat packers are the ones who set the prices in the grocery store. So it was kind of a little bit chaotic in the couple of days that surrounded that conversation and announcement from President Trump. But I think it opened a lot of conversation, understanding into how this industry actually works and who sets the prices and who doesn't. It's actually opened up some investigations into meat packers as antitrust type things, and I'm really interested to see what comes out of that. And more on the beef side, you kind of on the animal health side as well, is you've got this rise in this threat of New World screwworm. And Alden, I don't know if you know about New World screwworm, but it's a fly that essentially the larva of that fly, it's a parasitic fly. And it affects livestock and humans and domestic animals, but a large impact that we've seen in the United States is on the domestic cattle herd back in the 1960s. And this is a parasitic fly, and the larvae basically burrow themselves into the flesh of cattle, for instance, and they just start eating away. It causes an incredible infection. It's got to be treated professionally by vets, and a lot of the time there's no saving them once the fly comes into it. And earlier in the year, we had found out that there was New World screwworm detected in Mexico, in southern Mexico. There used to be this bio border in Panama, and back in the 60s, you saw this huge increase of New World screwworm, this prevalence, and it crippled the domestic cattle markets here in the United States and the herd. I mean, you didn't have any cows. The flies were killing them. And it's hard to treat because unlike typical maggots or something like that, they don't, these flies, they don't, or this larva, I guess, they feed on live flesh. It's not necrotic. It's not dead flesh. Right. And so it's just very, very hard to manage. And when you have this bio barrier in Panama, where you were producing and sterilized flies, male flies, to kind of cease this reproduction. If you've got sterilized male flies, they're not breeding and they're not creating them. And so we pushed this all the way back. I think it was 1966 back to Panama, and that was our bio barrier. We had USDA collaborated with a lot of Latin American countries, with Mexico, to have these sterile fly facilities to help fight this, so that this wasn't a concern for cattle producers and other producers. I mean, it can affect humans too. So there's this huge public safety concern as well. And recently that bio barrier was broken. And I mean, the problem went away. We closed our sterile fly production facilities down because there wasn't a need for them. And so you've seen over the past few months just gradually these flies moving up Latin America through Mexico. And there's a significant threat that is coming because it's really close to the Texas border now. I've talked about how Texas has the largest number of cattle and calves. What's going to happen if that barrier, if it crosses the border? So I mean, that's just another component. If that reaches our domestic herd, you might see beef prices go up incredibly, or a shortage of beef because our domestic herd is already almost at record low numbers. What's going to happen if that affects them even more?
Goodness gracious, that could be the next maybe October surprise for the election, even. Like, if that sounds pretty serious, and if it's breaking through that bio barrier you mentioned, do you think there's any chance it can be stopped? Like, what are the tools we have maybe to prevent this from reaching the Lone Star State?
Yeah, so you saw Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins get confirmed by the Senate. She started her role, and immediately, I mean, she got sworn in. She went straight from her swearing in ceremony to meetings with scientists at USDA and beef producers, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, getting briefed on all of this. And from there on, you know, there have been these actions that have come out of it where the United States USDA has upped sterile fly production and using like x-rays to sterilize those flies. They've started this production again and are releasing the flies. They can only make so many. USDA has also been able to go in and update some facilities in Mexico to start producing flies. And I think that's also happening in Panama. The issue is this went unseen for so long, and it's almost a little too late. So you're seeing a lot of production facilities get back up, but also what's really unique about the state of Texas, and I'm a little biased because that's my home state and I love it. But the Texas Rangers of Texas, they, not the baseball team, actual law enforcement, they have this subsect of the Texas Rangers that are specific to livestock. So they are actually able to kind of move up and down the border between Mexico and the United States, right there in Texas, and make sure and kind of monitor to see if they're seeing anything. There are a lot of cattle ranches down there. So making sure that nothing's happening. And you've got specialized folks that are down there constantly on the lookout. How can we treat this? How can we potentially create a vaccination that's going to prevent this from happening? And I don't know where that stands or if that's actually a right answer, but I think it's good to have all hands on deck. And that's what it seems like is happening right now. We can only hope that this sterile fly production increases so much to the point that we're able to kind of keep it at bay and not let it cross the Texas border.
Wonderful. And we actually have a question from a compliment and a question from Roy3121. Well said, Kerri. American land is for Americans or Americans. And the question is, should we break up giant meat packing and poultry monopolies to maybe help out with prices potentially?
This is a hard one because on one hand, it's really advanced a lot of poultry producers and meat producers, but it's also it kind of eliminated a lot of autonomy and freedom of choice. You've got these huge conglomerations right now that are setting prices and they're making choices for the whole industry, and it's not always the best choice for the industry. It's what can benefit them. And so, I mean, if I had to pick yes or no, then my answer is unequivocally yes. There should not be 2 or 3 companies in the United States that are setting the rules for everybody else.
Well said. Great answer. We'll move on to our next slide. And that's a great pre-question for the food supply chain question. We're talking about not only the people that set the prices, but the truck drivers, the people that will do the slaughtering, that drive the product, that help raise the livestock even potentially. And we're looking at these processing plants and the distributors are pretty key for the entire chain. And all of these, each layer, whether it's the first layer, second layer, 10th layer, how many there are, um, impact the farmer in some way.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's hard to understand the nuance and the complexities that is the food supply chain. Especially if you didn't grow up in the industry or at least in a high ag producing area, or even if you grew up in the city. I mean, food's just always there in the grocery store, right? But there are many, many stages to getting that food from, a live animal or a plant in a field all the way to your plate. And it's a long process. And at each handoff point, there's a cost associated, there's a risk associated, and there's time, right? I've talked about, the efficiency in trade, but that kind of also trickles down in the food supply chain. We've moved away from this really pastoral agricultural basis that the United States was in when it was founded, even when there were, colonists here, where you had maybe everybody had a cow or whatever it may be, and they were producing a lot of their own food. There wasn't a whole lot of trade going on. And you've seen that grow progressively over 250 years, right? Plus, even more than 250 years. But one consideration to have is, I mean, you've got less farms nowadays than you did 200 years ago. And so moving into the supply chain, I mean, it's an efficient food system that we have here in the United States, even globally, right? I've talked about some of these modernizations with trade, but it's really, really increased the speed and efficiency of our food supply chain. But when you've got, processing and packers and it's concentrated in very, very few facilities, a small disruption can just have these major ripple effects throughout the entire food supply chain. So, I mean, you've got this regionalization of meat packers, right? And any slight slowdown there, that's going to affect everybody in the United States. I mean, look back at COVID. JBS had a cyber attack shortly after, or even during, actually, my bad. And that crippled them. They're like the largest packer. And so you weren't able to get products moved to the grocery stores. I mean, they were just sitting there. So there was a shortage in the eyes of the consumer, maybe not of the product, but the shortage and lack of presence of this product at the grocery store. It's because there was this huge event that happened at a meat packer. And so having that integrity and making sure that there are no choke points and that things are seamless is incredibly, incredibly important. I mean, even today, I deal a lot with this more temperature controlled or logistics for the food supply chain, right? And so you think about cold chain integrity, refrigerated transport, storage, and inspection, making sure every single one of those processes function the way that they need to and as fast as they need to, is important. And in a lot of ways, if practices aren't done correctly, then it could render that food inedible or unsafe to eat. You've got export and import inspections, some backlogs to that. I mean, you're seeing a shortage of food safety FSIS inspectors from USDA, where they're not able to get to those facilities and inspect the meat and poultry products the way that they're supposed to, or FDA inspectors not getting there to be able to look at, whatever else it may be. And so, you've got to have, this end-to-end integrity, and how do we work and make sure each link of this chain, they're communicating to each other and that things are going the way that they need to go.
Great. Yeah, that's terrific information. And bring up a good point about the risks of, if the inspectors can't examine the food, then that puts us at risk. I know someone who got food poisoning at a rallies, I believe it was one time, and they were in immense pain because of that. So I have a question from the audience here at Ronwin Nance. Great information this evening. The grocery costs are so high, the average American family is struggling to feed their families. What needs to happen to help reduce the costs?
I think there are multiple things that could happen and should happen to reduce the cost of groceries. I mean, you've seen them skyrocket within the past few years. A lot of that can be attributed to low numbers or unfair trade practices, or even, outsourcing a lot of labor, or sorry, not labor, my apologies, production of certain inputs elsewhere. And so, I mean, it starts all the way at feed inputs for livestock or fertilizer for crops. I mean, if there's a regional conflict going on and you're not able to get the minerals that you need for fertilizer, then the fertilizer is going to you're going to have to find those minerals elsewhere. They're going to be more expensive. It's going to cause a delay. So you rack up costs at every single stage, and it just has this one thing ripples through the entire food chain, and I mean, food supply chain. And then that's what we see at the grocery store when we look at $8 a pound for beef, for ground beef of all things, and I think some things can happen. Maybe that's finding these critical minerals that are available in the US, but allowing us to utilize them to produce fertilizer. I think that it's making sure that we have markets for our crops to go to, soybeans, corn, whatever that may be. But also maybe kind of nearshoring some of our practices, right? Or bringing them back home. American steel, American produced goods. So we're not having to pay for these extra costs that are given at the transportation and shipping of these products.
Wonderful. Hopefully that helps your question at Ronwin Nance. Alrighty. And something that you mentioned along with labor potentially is that we have the president, I believe yesterday, made the comments about how whether it was him recognizing or for political reasons or other reasons, maybe that the deportation policy will remain, that trying to get criminals and violent people removed from the country before people that work on farms or in hospitality industry. And we've seen that sometimes these farmers, maybe even though they don't want to, they're forced to go this route rather than another way.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of makes it tough for all parties involved.
Yeah, I think there's got to be some sort of strong border policies and making sure that there's security there. But also, there's a reality that there is illegal labor happening in U.S. farms, and I think there are multiple things to blame here for that. I think that, while I do support having safe borders and not allowing an influx of illegal immigration, I think there's an important consideration to have that if you don't have the proper labor and the support you need to harvest crops and to produce food, then you don't have a food system. And unfortunately, the majority of this farm labor is from, other countries. It's foreign labor. And in a lot of instances, it's illegal. And you have certain visa programs, right? Worker visa programs for foreign folks that are able to come work in the United States. And one of those specific to agriculture is H-2A. The H-2A program is just completely unworkable and it's unrealistic. And you've got farmers that are struggling to make ends meet already. And you've got this H-2A visa program that requires you to if you're going to hire seasonal labor, this is a seasonal visa. It's not, whenever you want it. It's got to be for specialty crops in certain times of the year. You have to provide them with housing. They've got to have a minimum wage. They've got to have insurance and healthcare, and all these huge costs just to have, workers come in for harvest. So if that's not, one thing that already makes it hard, think about the fact that 95% of the time this work arrives too late. So by the time you need them, they're not there. They come 2 weeks later and you're already done harvesting. And so, I don't know what the solution is here, right? We've got this American dream where the middle class is growing and people are able to have larger opportunities, right? And so there isn't a huge amount of U.S. labor or U.S. folks that are wanting to work on the farm anymore because it doesn't pay what, a corporate job in Houston, Texas pays, right? you've got opportunities, you've got education. And so I don't know. I think that there's got to be some sort of reform to this H-2A visa program. There's got to be I don't even know if you keep the H-2A visa program or you just completely scrap it and start from the beginning. But there's got to be something done to prevent crime, happening in our country on illegal immigrants, or from illegal immigrants. And I'm not saying that, farm labor is mutually exclusive to violent criminals, or that they're not all the way separated. But I mean, there's got to be a fix here, right? We need the labor on our farms, and if American citizens aren't willing to do it because it doesn't pay what it needs to pay, then we've got to fix something else to make sure that we can get the labor we need.
Right, and that's something that is commonly discussed about it not being a good draw for a citizen, or a citizen maybe with a lot of potential or aspirations in particular for something like this. So it's a tough situation all around that will require a debate for a different style of episode, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Alrighty. And Kerri mentioned this a few minutes ago about the production timeline and the food supply and whatnot. And if you went out for dinner tonight, or have been at Outback Steakhouse, or had a nice steak this weekend, I'll say, myself personally, and we're talking about there's a long process of when that was a living animal compared to when it was brought out to me at the steakhouse. So, just some quick little notes on that. We're talking about a half year to a full year. They're raised on these ranches. Then typically, got beef them up, make them a little plump before death time, before processing begins. And it just, after that begins, we're talking a mere weeks until it might hit the grocery store or your plate at the steakhouse.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, beef production specifically is a long bet on the future. I mean, you decide you're going to start producing cattle for beef production, or raising cattle for beef production. I mean, you buy your cows and it's 2 years before you're going to even see any return on that investment. And every stage locks in that capital months and years before any revenue starts to appear for you. So any sort of predictability in feed cost and regulation and trade, it all matters to producers, because they're taking a gamble, right? They're gambling here, deciding that they're going to produce beef. They don't know what that's going to entail for them 2 years down the line. And there's multiple stages, and I can kind of briefly walk you through some examples. I mean, starting at a cow-calf operation, which is where you have female heifers or cows, heifer being a young female of the bovine species that is not calved or is under 2 years old, and a cow specifically being a female of the bovine species who has calved. You've got these cows you're then breeding them to bulls, then they're producing calves, and it's this huge cycle, and you're putting back into your operation, and then you're selling some of these, the male calves, are going into production and then going into feed yards to produce beef, for the most part. You've got backgrounding, you've got feedlots. I mean, as soon as these calves, I mean, you've got about a year that they're at your operation, say, and then they go to a feedlot for a couple of months, and then they get beefed up and get that fatty marbling that makes beef taste so much better. But it's multiple stages. Once they leave the feed yard, they go to the packers, they get, slaughtered, and they're cut, these cuts of beef are made and packaged up and put in the grocery store. But each step in this production line, it adds a cost. It's got time and cost associated with it, right? So we talked a little bit about drought, and the cattle cycle kind of just now starting to catch up the prices with that. And drought forces ranchers to liquidate their herds, earlier. Maybe they shrink future supply. Maybe, this is driving long-term price volatility. So they're uncertain about what's next for them and what numbers they need to hold. Maybe there's regulatory delays at slaughter inspection points that ripple, backwards. And we talked a little bit about withdrawal periods with hormones or any kind of vaccination or medicine that was given. I mean, there's a certain time associated with each additive to where you cannot slaughter that animal before that timeline expires, to make sure that all of that product, all that vaccination is out of the system of that animal so that you don't ingest it when you are eating that product. But I mean, if there are delays or if something happens, there's a delay, there's something that ripples backwards as well. Lowers cattle prices and increases some uncertainty in the industry. So there's really this emphasis and need for predictable regulation and infrastructure, especially in capacity, it's essential to keep this long-term cycle and system viable for producers.
Great. And yeah, you mentioned a lot of those key details that I don't think a lot of people really realized or took into account before maybe hearing this. So
yeah,
thank you for those additional details. Alrighty. And a similar deal for veggies and fruits and coffee beans. I'm sure most people watching this or listening probably either had coffee at work or before school or something like that today. And maybe you know, maybe you don't know that vast majority of coffee beans are imported, and it's such a common product. Every time you go to Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts, the line is around the building of people eating their morning coffee. So we're talking about not something that's just common. It's something that is so common that almost everyone consumes it at least weekly, if not daily. And same with stuff you see at the grocery store, bananas. I remember as a kid, I had a banana almost every day, it felt like. And I'm just one kid in Southwest Indiana. We're talking about hundreds of millions of people in just our country. So yeah, it's a pretty shocking thing, but there's also a big production timeline with these products as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can kind of speak to some of these nuances and also maybe a little bit to the agricultural trade deficit that the U.S. is facing right now. But trade in fruits and vegetables, coffee, you see a lot with bananas and avocados and coffee. The U.S. imports what we can't grow. Our climate here in the United States does not support that kind of production for those products. And trade opportunities have allowed that product into our market, and it's become our society is reliant on it now. But fair enforcement and workable labor policy ensure that these imports they don't replace, they complement American production. So you hear a lot, I kind of referenced the ag trade deficit, but it's this huge conversation happening in the agricultural space and in these circles right now, where historically the United States has been a net exporter of agricultural goods, and we found ourselves in the past 2 years as a net importer of agricultural goods. And while I don't think this is necessarily good or bad, it's a little interesting. It's something that's different, and I don't know if this is a new normal or just, a little bit of a one-off situation. But there are multiple reasons for this switch. There's increased choice. American consumers have more choice at the grocery store now, and that demand from U.S. consumers signals more imports coming in from other countries. You've got these expanded trade relationships that the U.S. has, and then also in general, just an overall increase in U.S. consumption. And a deficit isn't always only an indicator that U.S. producers are facing challenges exporting their product. It's more nuanced than that, right? There's been an increased demand in the last few years and consumption for consumers, and it's accurately and economically proves that there's a shift in the deficit. Really, the only way to shrink a deficit, specifically in trade, is to reduce consumption, right? And I'm not sure if that's going to happen. Just because we're importing more than we're exporting doesn't mean that we're exporting less. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just means that we're demanding more and we're importing more. And some of those are specialized crops and products like bananas and avocados and coffee. Um, so I think there's a conversation to be had about that. I think this U.S. ag trade deficit reflects multiple structural shifts. Like I said, consumer demand and increased demand for diverse food. There's these expanded trade relationships. I talked about reciprocal trade. Well, if the U.S. is selling product in Indonesia, then we need to be buying product from Indonesia. I firmly believe in that free and fair trade there. Excuse me. And then again, overall higher consumption. This doesn't really automatically signal producer failure. Um, it often just reflects a broader economic growth and consumer choice, which I think is great. But reducing that deficit again would require either increasing our exports or reducing our consumption, which are complex in their entirety, both of them individually. So I don't know if the focus should be on fair trade enforcement and competitiveness rather than deficit figures alone. I think we need to look more at that fair trade enforcement and competitiveness as opposed to just looking at the numbers and saying, "Oh, this is bad. We're importing more than we're exporting."
Tracking. Very, very good points. Absolutely. Uh, let's go. Something that is happened a couple weeks ago. I'm sure that if you're watching, you know one of the more maybe controversial at first, but if you are America First and even MAGA at that point, is that you have to be on at least some sectors, you have to be quite impressed with HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy, his attention for physical fitness, trying to encourage healthier eating. And if you went to public school in the United States, I'm sure you saw or were taught about, at a minimum, the prior food period or food pyramid, excuse me. And we saw at the bottom that it was mostly, or the widest section, which was the bottom at the prior pyramid, was bread, wheat, bagels, stuff like that. And then you kind of go with dairy, then fruits, veggies, etc. Then like candy was at the top. But we're really seeing a shift with this admin towards more protein, animal meat, eggs. Highest, I believe, per like serving is the highest dose of protein you can get. And it's just one of those things that's really healthy for you. So this caught my eye when I saw this a couple weeks ago and wanted to get your thoughts and maybe what the ag industry is thinking about it.
Yeah, I think one thing to address firstly is, I mean, when I was a kid, I didn't really get educated a whole lot on nutrition. And I don't know if that's because I'm from a really small rural town in Texas or if that's just a failure on the education system as a whole, right? But like you said, this pyramid used to be flipped almost upside down in the structure. Grains still being at the bottom, but that's the widest part of the triangle, right? So it makes you think that that's where the core of your diet should be, and that's not true. I think that a lot of research has really proven and emphasized that nutrient density is more important. And you're looking at beef, dairy, eggs, and poultry, all huge domestic strengths for the United States. And I don't think any prior guidance reflected that at all. And I think it's really interesting as we talk about, RFK Jr. and this food pyramid and this collaboration between HHS and USDA. It's kind of unheard of, right? These folks should be communicating, but you've seen this renewed collaboration and cooperation between the two, and it's very encouraging. But as nutrition science evolves, it's very, very clear that real protein-rich foods matter. And I think America excels at producing exactly that. By aligning your nutritional policy based in science with your domestic production, it supports both your public health for the entirety of the nation as well as these farm income. So you've got protein-rich foods such as beef, dairy, eggs, fish. They provide these essential amino acids, iron, zinc, B vitamins, fat-soluble nutrients that are critical for muscle development and cognitive function, as well as your metabolic health. That's incredibly important. But when you get into these processed foods and grains, not that they're bad for you, but in excess can, affect your health. I'm really encouraged to see this flipped food pyramid. I think it's really good, and it's going to flip the script on nutrition. And I mean, I hope that as we move forward in the world, that we're able to increase the amount of nutrition education, even to that end, agricultural education, so that people can understand where their food comes from, why it comes from where it comes from, and how do they make the best and healthiest choices for themselves in their diet.
Absolutely. And we have a comment from at Jacob Aguirre 3. I'm awoken. Welcome. Congratulate you have joined the Awoken. Wonderful. And another comment about the food pyramid is that a nation, especially like ours, we need to be healthy. We need to make sure that we're not eating a bunch of processed junk that's not even real food, that don't even, like, the food isn't even real. It's the craziest thing to think about a lot. And so hopefully this begins a shift of the food culture, and that we need to, steak is very like bread is good. It's filling. Like it can complement like burgers. Sometimes best part about a burger is that wonderful bread at whatever restaurant you like. So they can complement each other, but definitely should be prioritizing fruits, veggies, and protein dense foods.
Absolutely.
If you were here for the Greenland episode, the Inuit people in Greenland, they didn't survive off of they couldn't grow plants hardly, so they had to eat just animal meat, whether it's whales or fish. So you can survive just off of that top low section alone. So that's something I don't think people sometimes think about. Right. And one of the things is that I didn't realize before coming to DC, and I think that a lot of people don't really realize when we're talking about the Farm Bill I believe every year there's supposed to be a new one. I don't think there's been a really renewed version for a couple cycles now. However, they may think, oh, it's just for farmers. It just maybe helps them get more equipment, more tractors, etc. Well, 75% of the bill around is about SNAP and that program about getting SNAP dollars out. And where the Trump I believe in the big beautiful bill, or whether it was that or when the government shutdown occurred back last fall, you saw these people concerned about not getting their EBT cards reloaded or their food stamps placed out. So we're seeing some changes with the Trump admin with this, whether it's work requirements or what you can purchase or can't purchase, and that impacts all the farmers, the stores, and the food processors.
Yeah, absolutely. So SNAP specifically.
It might snow a lot this weekend.
I know.
Yeah. Make sure use your SNAP card to grab a couple items.
Yeah. So SNAP is one of the nutrition assistance programs that is funded under the Farm Bill. And so the Farm Bill is a very big omnibus bill that is passed or reauthorized typically every 5 years. That's kind of this cycle that we've been on for a while. The last Farm Bill that was passed was in 2018 when Congressman Mike Conaway of Texas was his chairman. So now we've ushered in a couple new sessions of Congress and still have no new Farm Bill. There's been extensions and CRs, and there's this huge debate right now, right, between Democrats and Republicans. And I know you mentioned the one big beautiful bill, and within that there's a good bit of agricultural programs that typically are covered underneath the Farm Bill that were actually taken care of within the One Big Beautiful Bill. And one of those was nutrition. And you see this huge conversation occurring between Democrats and Republicans, where Democrats are kind of shouting from the rooftops that the Republicans and GOP, they're trying to cut back SNAP dollars, and they're taking food out of Americans' mouths, and that's not necessarily true. There was not a rollback of funding and a decrease in funding. It was just that funding didn't expand. Go back to the Farm Bill. 75% of the funding that goes to that $1.4 trillion bill is for nutrition assistance. And it's a little ironic that it is then called the Farm Bill. But that the majority of that money is going to nutrition assistance programs, not farm programs. So, SNAP is supposed to be a temporary program that Americans can use as assistance as they are able to, and SNAP, for those watching that aren't familiar, that stands for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. You've also got WIC as well. And these are meant to help, lower income folks or people who are down on their luck be able to afford healthy foods. That's evolved into eligible items not just being whole healthy foods. It's these ultra processed foods. It's boxed macaroni and cheese. Hey, I love Annie's organic shells, the white cheddar ones. I do, but also I don't eat that every day for every meal. You know what I mean? So really, you've seen soda and sugary treats be eligible under SNAP for your EBT card to be used, and it's not helping this kind of nutritional and health crisis we're having in the United States, where people need to be making better nutritional decisions. You've got people who are on this assistance program that are not intentionally all the time buying foods that are not as healthful for them, and it's got to be something that changes here in the future. So again, SNAP dollars aren't getting cut like you're hearing a lot this rhetoric coming from the Democrats, but it's not expanding. And why should it expand? That's 75% of a farm bill. Why are we not focusing more dollars and a larger percentage of that bill on, risk management programs? If we're not looking at disaster assistance programs for farmers and ranchers, and making sure that there are certain things within the trade title of the Farm Bill that really further gives market access to U.S. products in foreign markets. And so it's an interesting dynamic we're seeing, and you're seeing a lot of holdup in the Farm Bill process because of this disagreement. Shrinking margin from the majority and the minority in the House. And so you're kind of at this standstill right now because nothing's being able to move forward, because the crux of this argument is really SNAP and nutrition assistance.
Totally. And I misspoke about it's supposed to be funded every year, and because I forgot it's a 5-year bill is because it hasn't been passed since 18. So I remember every year they decide, well, are we going to refund it, and it never gets funded again.
Yep.
And Kerri just alluded to this about maybe it doesn't have to be 75% SNAP. Some of the extra money could be going towards prevention or crop insurance or something like that. And a little background on crop insurance from what I know, at least a little bit, is that we talked about the risk management and the risk factors sometimes, that if there's a bad weather season, you kind of see in the background on the photo, you got flooding or lightning, to signal terrible weather. And in the middle, you kind of have a large patch of sun. So there's multiple ways that are out of your control to where your entire crop or your all your livestock, something happens to that, whether it's that tick worm that Kerri was talking about that infects these animals and just kills them, that are really out of your control. And if you can't sell anything for that year, if you make no money the entire year, how can you stay afloat? And that's where crop insurance comes in.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked about the risks that are uncontrollable, and farmers a lot of time are at the mercy of Mother Nature. They don't know what the year is going to entail. There's no way to predict that. Um, and insurance, just like in any other sector, your auto insurance, your home insurance, your if you live on the coast, your hurricane insurance, making sure that you're protected in the event of disaster or a car crash, or maybe your home catches on fire, making sure that there's this safety net for you in the event of something going wrong. The same can be said about a farm. It's a little irresponsible to not have crop insurance if you're putting in this huge investment to grow something. And we've talked about upfront costs and capital, and a lot of that has to be financed out. And so you've got your lenders, your credit lenders, and a lot of that financing and the line of credit that you're able to grab and achieve depends on the amount of coverage you have in crop insurance. And so that insurance actually does enable producers to maintain and preserve their independence. And it keeps them farming even after disaster strikes. And I mean, if you don't have it, you reduce your coverage, the lenders pull back, you're not able to continue producing. So, I mean, where does that put us? Depending on foreign imported food? I don't know. It's a very, very important component.
And we don't want to be at the mercy of other countries, maybe having enough food for our population to eat. And it could be very expensive, so we could lose out on a ton of money that way potentially. Um, I know some more libertarians or free market people will argue against it, saying, well, there shouldn't be any government at all. So maybe not saying that I'm one of those people, but what would you say is a counter to that? Because that's an argument that I've heard a couple times about.
I think that the opinion that no government intervention ever in any sector is makes us better off is a little bit short-sighted. I, like a lot of folks, don't like big government. I don't like it. I wish they'd stay out of my business a lot of times. But when you've got instances like this and an industry that is really relying on factors they can't control, there is a proactive thing that can be obtained from having government intervention in things like this.
Great answer. Yeah, that's just something I've heard from a couple people since being in DC, and
Yeah.
it kind of gets to the point to where um, food not being able to eat might trump
Mhm.
some of those other concerns. Alrighty, and we have a very big, diverse country. Soil is different in different sectors of the country, regions of the country. Weather is different, as we see in Florida. There's not a whole lot of snow in particular. You have the Northeast. We may be snowed in this weekend. However, every time if you're from the Midwest, there's nothing better than that 12-hour car ride down to Florida for spring break and stopping at the Welcome Center and getting that fresh cup of orange juice. That's what Florida's known for. That's their strength in agriculture. To whereas Indiana, my home state in Iowa, they're known for all of the corn in particular and beans and products like that. At North Carolina, the Tobacco Road, um, not only is it used in the context of Duke and North Carolina, but it's also, where a lot of the tobacco comes from, and all the regions have their own strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, American agriculture succeeds because of the regional diversity. You can't get this anywhere else in the world. It's just incredibly cool. I know I'm nerding out a little bit about it, but it makes me a little emotional to think about the fact that we could sustain ourselves without having any, trade happening right here, just with our agricultural outputs. But up in we'll start, in the Midwest, these grains are huge anchors for our export markets. In the Southeast, you've got a an immense amount of production in the protein sector, specifically that in poultry. Um, you've also got a lot of cotton production going down there, important for the textile industry. You've got tobacco, of course. Um, even up here into Virginia, there is a huge poultry, production value here. Um, in the Southwest, my home state of Texas, you've got amazing, amazing land for cattle. Texas is a very diverse in its own right. We've got row crops. We grow cotton, we grow corn. It's not the same corn that you eat when you eat your corn on the cob. That goes into animal feed if it's grown in Texas. But you got cattle, you've got your corn, you've got cotton growing, you've got some soybeans, you've got, I mean, just everything, sorghum. It's amazing. We're able to continue to produce cattle and grow cattle because of some of these other agricultural inputs that maybe aren't, used for human consumption. Moving into the West, you've got amazing produce that's growing there: melons, fruit, tree nuts, vegetables down there in California. The thing is, you've got to support all these strengths in these regions, but you've also got to understand some vulnerabilities, right? California specifically faces a lot of concerns with water availability and the sustainability of their agricultural sector. How do we make sure they have the water they need? You've got your beef packers centralized. How do we make sure that the beef production is kind of centralized in that area so that it reduces transportation costs and transportation timelines? Maybe reducing prices and not having those increases in prices at the grocery store. Got to make sure you've got the right soil for the right crops you're growing. And so, I don't know. I think it's very beautiful, the kind of diversity we have in our agricultural sector. And I think it's really important to play into those strengths and make sure that we really build up that resilience.
The country is, you make a cool point about like even being emotional with it, is that like that's what makes this country a very special country in particular. China can't say the same thing, and they want to be the top dogs. And
and they can't be. They simply cannot be.
Imports. Yep. Yeah, it makes it a very unique country that all states, they have their own strengths, and to where they can help the other states out and help the people out. And you have these these local farms that are dependent on feeding these very small communities, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Now let's go into talk a little politics necessarily with the last couple of presidents we've had. We have the Trump admin particularly push or have more of this maybe nationalist approach, in the sense that the tariffs, the trade, makes it a little unpredictable, in the sense, and under the Biden admin, we see a lot of these climate based initiatives, whether it's so I was listening to the president's speech today, the windmills killing all the birds or whatever. They get kind of being goofy there. However, a lot of climate initiatives, and China does not follow those same precautions for sure. And politics does impact a lot of day-to-day choices for these farmers.
Absolutely. And what's really unique about farm country and rural America is that they don't really vote mostly on ideology. They vote based on as a response to policy signals. So these folks rely on predictability, and they are in an increasingly unpredictable environment, right? That their livelihoods rely on. And they're natural stewards of the land. You look at Biden and these very, very antagonistic climate requirements and regulatory burdens that were placed on them. That makes their lives harder. And, the farmers know best. What do these people in Washington know? You know what I mean? But I think, especially in the Trump era of 1 and 2, there's a fear from a lot of people about trade. Maybe there's volatility in that trade relationship and where these products are being exported. But I mean, I don't know, going back to Biden, these climate smart practices like no-till farming, crop rotation, cover crops, these precision nutrient management programs. This should be an incentive based program. This should not be a regime that's placed on as a requirement onto farmers. It should be something that they choose what is best for their operation, and they're able to do that without the government saying, hey, you have to do this. I think that a lot of farmers want this stability. They don't want slogans. They don't want this campaign language, right? They don't care about that. They want a clear and consistent policy lens that lets them do what they do best, which is feeding the nation. And they rely on a lot of things such as reference prices, disaster assistance, crop insurance, and counter-cyclical programs that helps them manage risk across multi-year planning. And so these tools don't necessarily guarantee a profit. And so it just kind of helps prevent catastrophic loss, right? So I don't know. I think that you saw a huge push from the farm country voting for Trump this election, because despite some uncertainty in the trade space in his first term, it was a friendlier environment for them as producers, and they were able to make the best decisions that they could make for their operations, which I think is very, very interesting. And I think that for the most part, they're happy this second term. I think the trade conversation's also coming up, but you're seeing a rollback of some burdensome regulation from the Biden administration, and I think they're really, really enjoying that.
It's great to hear. And yeah, we mentioned that we don't want government and bed making every decision for us. And if they are, then that's a problem. They're hogging up too much of the bed, making it to where can't make a profit or maybe grow the crops that the farmers desire that season.
Yeah.
Alrighty. And big deal, back to the tariffs and the government stuff. If you, any young person, anybody has seen a neighbor or a television commercial or Brett Favre riding a John Deere and using that equipment. You've seen the brand of John Deere at Walmart, big time. Everyone wants, hey, your buddy or your neighbor Jim down the street, hey Fred, come check out my new John Deere I just bought. And going into the politics with like the equipment, this stuff isn't cheap, especially for farmers. Like you have huge machinery like on the screen, and that is meant to help with tens of thousands of square feet or acres or farmland of helping harvest. And tariffs on steel have hurt the cost of some of this farm equipment, and as well it can delay upgrades and slow productivity for farmers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like it says there on the slide, steel tariffs, they raise these equipment costs. You've got to finance these big, huge machines out because nobody can drop $500,000 on a new tractor, which only magnifies these price hikes. Efficiency can be reduced if you're not upgrading efficiently. And there's got to be some sort of balance that's struck, right? Farm equipment prices reflect a lot of the trade policy. So protecting the industry mustn't cripple producers. I think that, I don't think that. I know that tariffs on steel and manufactured components, you look at chips that go in, these microchips that go into these machines, they directly increase the cost of farm machinery. And this machinery is needed to harvest and plant a lot of these commodities. And like I mentioned again, because equipment is often financed, there's a higher sticker price, which is even more magnified by interest rates. And it increases total ownership costs, right? It's just unequivocally just increasing. So I don't know. It's very hard to understand that and realize that this is a situation you're in. But I also think there's a positive side. If we're focusing more on producing steel in the United States again, we could see a decrease in those prices, and maybe they stabilize and are a little bit more regular. We're not seeing these huge price spikes. But only time will tell. You can't just start up the domestic steel industry and turn it on like a light switch.
Take some time, not the most easiest thing in the world. Now looking at supply shocks, something that we've experienced this the last couple of years, whether it's through the COVID pandemic or the flu, I believe around a year ago, that made eggs crazy unaffordable, like double or tripled in price.
Mm-hmm.
And this cattle death in Kansas, I'm not sure if you guys remember, but in the summer of 2022, in Kansas on this farm, about 2,000 cattle passed away randomly at a moment's notice, and that is a year's worth of income for some farms, especially state like Kansas, where it's not a densely populated state at all. That's someone's livelihood on the line there. So, yeah, we're talking about any little moment can shock the supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've talked a little bit about animal disease in cattle. Another thing is avian influenza, and that really spikes and increases its prevalence in the warmer months. You've got chickens that are in houses, and they're really they're in close proximity to each other, and that disease is passed around very quickly. And then you've got these animals that are dying, and they're not producing eggs. And so it's just incredible how quickly something like that can I don't want to say cripple, but create these incredible shocks to the supply and the price that you see in the grocery store. So there's got to be maybe a movement into better health standards, better support from the government. And I hesitate to say that because government's not your friend in a lot of cases. But, how do we find a vaccination maybe that helps keep avian influenza at bay? How that's not, transferred into the food product at the end of the day. But I don't know. It's interesting. But we've got to make sure we've got rapid response to these. It's truly essential to help prevent isolated outbreaks from becoming a huge national supply crisis. And Alden, I do see a comment a question in the comments from Roy at Roy3121, kind of questioning my thoughts on establishing an agricultural right to repair. And I believe what he's referring to is specifically John Deere tractors. There's this clause in a lot of their warranty agreements on their tractors where farmers are required, if they want to maintain their warranty on their machinery, they're required to take it to an authorized mechanic to work on that tractor. If you work on it yourself, maybe you're handy with the tools and engines and you're able to do that. If you do that and there's evidence that you did that, when you take it in, something's not right, then your warranty is essentially voided. And even more costs to get your machine repaired. There's no warranty there. And so there's a huge push from farmers right now to have this, we call it right to repair, right? Where farmers can't be told that they can't fix their own machinery. A lot of these people are in very, very rural, isolated areas that are not, they've got to load up this tractor that is probably not working correctly onto a trailer and take it into town. Who knows how long that's going to take them. And then they've got to leave it at the shop for a couple of days. It's just very, very inefficient. And so I think that there's merit in a possibility to develop a right to repair program. But I don't want it to negatively impact John Deere's business. But at the end of the day, these producers are footing these costs. They should be able to do what they want to do with their $500,000 tractor.
Okay. I did not know that you had to take it into a licensed mechanic. And is that a licensed mechanic by like that has to meet John Deere standards, or is it just okay? So John Deere, they're picking who essentially a sliver of who you have to go get this fixed by. So it could
Mhm.
almost be a Ponzi scheme in some scenarios.
Mhm.
Wow. Okay. Did not know that. Glad to know. And we're we've talked about before on the show. We're nearing 9 to 10 months until the general midterm elections in November. We're going to start hearing that a lot. Maybe the rhetoric starts to change from the admin or Brooke Rollins about maybe some policies with the farming. And farmers, they are a crucial voting bloc in the
Yeah.
electorate, of course. And I'm sure that they would love policy stability. Maybe they can plan a little more because of that, uh, particularly around trade as well. And uh, yeah, in general, just hoping for strong leadership that they can be like, oh, um, I'm gonna do what I can as a farmer for my country and produce for my community and state and country, and hope the leadership does the rest.
Absolutely. And so, I mean, when you're looking at what farmers want uh, from this next election, they want somebody that is going to guarantee that they have long term stability, that there is predictable trade and tax policy. I mean, if you've got a farm and you're passing it down to your kids, what's going to happen when you pass on and they're not able to afford the tax on that property and to maintain that business? That's where you lose a lot of these family farms. It's because there's a tax associated with it, the death tax, if you will. Um, they want, going back to what I think farmers are looking for in this next election, they want fair global competition. They don't want to be undercut by competitors. They want reciprocal trade agreements and free trade that's actually free trade. And I think that something that I think that farmers would want is there's some recognition as a critical component in this security sphere and being partners in that. I mean, they kind of safeguard the future of us, right? Um, so I've talked about it before. Farmers want a lot of stability, not slogans, and that's the truth. They don't want to hear, MAGA, make America great again. They want to hear how you're going to actually give them the stability that they desire and make sure that their business and their livelihood is protected. So I think that stability is the main component of this, but they're looking for somebody who's going to actually hear them out and understand the importance of their industry. You've seen them really come out for Trump because Trump's come out for the farmers and really supported them. So I'm interested to see what comes next in these midterms and who's running for president next and what this looks like. It'll be an interesting turn of events.
Certainly, and only the future will tell us what is going to happen.
Absolutely.
Wrapping things up, why does this matter all of a sudden? Why should we become awoken to the agriculture industry and the sector in our country? And we've talked about a lot is being able to eat, something that a lot of us take for granted. Generally, that you wake up and walk to the fridge and there's milk and there's eggs and bread, additional products. Has to also do with um, trade and labor and employment. Maybe your family farm, you grew up on a family farm and that's your life. That's all you've ever known is that farm. And it's very important to you. So there's a lot of things that tie into the agriculture industry. And I hope you've learned a lot tonight from our special guest, Kerri.
Absolutely. Glad to be here, Alden. I mean, I guess why does this matter, right? Agricultural policy not only supports the farmers, it supports you as a consumer. It shows up at the checkout line for you. So the choices that are made now in agricultural policy determine whether America is able to control the future of its food system. I've said it once, I'll say it again. A country that cannot feed itself cannot sustain itself. And so, with that, food systems, they operate on thin margins with little slack. Inflation really drives some of these, like energy, labor, trade. It flows all directly to you as a consumer. Um, and I know producers, they kind of absorb that volatility early on. You don't really see that as a consumer, but those policy choices that are made now are going to affect you down the line. And so having this independence and this support for this industry, it's foundational to our economic prosperity and our national security.
Very well said. And with that, we will exit out of the presentation and we'll head to, if anyone in the audience, again, thank you for tuning in tonight. We're happy to field questions from the audience. If there are any. A lot of great questions were asked throughout the night. Thank you to Nicholas and Roy and Ronwin and Jacob for being awoken tonight with some great comments and questions. We appreciate that. Let's there we go. Now we can see a little better. But yeah, I learned a lot tonight just doing the research. Yeah, we got a comment from Roy. Great job, Kerri and Aulden. Thank you, Roy 3121.
Thank you, Roy.
And I learned a lot through research, and I'm glad that even in this conversation, I learned a lot myself that I didn't really like the John Deere clause and that tick that broke through the bio barrier. That is something that might be a hot take that next couple months we see a crisis with beef price. Maybe they increase even more. So lots of stuff to consider and think about for the future with agriculture in the United States.
Absolutely. Aulden, I guess you can say that tonight even you were awoken.
Good one. Yes, I was awoken to the importance and the necessity of the agriculture industry. Thank you, Kerri, for awakening me to this important factor.
Well, thank you for having me on. I'm glad I could be here and talk a little bit about the agricultural industry.
Absolutely. And unless if anyone else has any questions, next couple seconds, just want to remind you to please leave the video a like, drop a subscription if you're still here, and thank you for watching tonight. Feel free to share the video with your friends or leave a comment on what you thought Kerri spoke best about. Spoke great on several of these industries within the agriculture department. And with that, you have been awoken with Aulden. All right, good night, everybody. Much love. Thank you again, Kerri. We will catch you sometime next week.
Absolutely. Bye, everybody.